Hello friends, welcome to the MARE Podcast. Before we get started, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Don't forget that you can find more about the MARE project at www.marehamburg.com, and you can support the project and this podcast through Patreon. All the links are in the description. Enjoy! Hello friends and listeners of the MARE Podcast and dear followers of the MARE project. Welcome to another episode of the MARE Podcast. I am beyond excited to welcome Vanshika tonight on the podcast. Vanshika is known by many names. Vanshika, Vashinka, Vashinika, and I'm referring to the many ways that people write her name in emails because people can't get it right. So maybe this is a podcast where this goes out the correct way. Her name is Vanshika. Vanshika is originally from India, but she is currently residing in Reading. She finished a master's in archaeology at the University of Oxford last year. And now she is working at the collections of the British Museum in Reading. So welcome to the podcast, Vanshika, after this long introduction.
Yeah, very important introduction as well. It's Vanshika, guys. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So Vanshika, as I said, you are currently in Reading. You moved from Oxford to Reading, which is, I don't know, downgrade, some would say. Anyway, to work for the British Museum or in the collection of the British Museum. Do you want to give us like a rough idea of what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, after I finished my master's, which was like very museum focused, I was kind of like, okay, I need some like real museum experience before I, further go into research. So yeah, I kind of got a job with the British Museum. They have an archaeological research collection here in Reading. So like that's recently started. So yeah, basically my job is kind of looking into very, very old, like 40-year-old archaeological finds that were never, processed after an excavation and kind of just, making sure that they're alive and well, let's say. So yeah, it's just auditing, cleaning up, packing them properly, like making them ready for research, stuff like that. Yeah.
So you're basically doing God's work. Just
doesn't feel like it.
Well, someone has to do it, right? So someone can research it afterwards. So you were an integral part of research. Excellent. So why are you here and why I invite you here? It's because, as you said, your research was very focused on museums. And I think it's super interesting. And your thesis was about museums. I'm not going to go into much detail because I want you to go into much detail. So do you want to talk to us about your master's thesis and your research?
Yay, bring back the nightmares.
You're not the first person who introduced the research like that. Anyway, yeah, continue.
Yeah, anybody who's done that dissertation would say, I think, the same in some capacity or another. I think by the end, we kind of develop like a love-hate relationship with it. Can be toxic, but yeah, anyway, I did my research on like a collection of objects, which I called the William Crook collection. It was collected by this very British guy called William Crook. And yeah, it's currently housed in the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. Anybody who's, by the way, listening and hasn't been to the Pitt Rivers, if you get the chance, I think I'm just throwing like a nice recommendation in there. So...
Because it's hidden, right? Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
It's kind of a hidden, right? The Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford is behind the National History Museum.
It is.
What am I saying?
The natural history. Yeah.
National History, what? The Natural History Museum in Oxford. So if you go into the Natural History Museum, behind it, through the museum, you will reach the Pitt Rivers Museum. Yeah, so that was a nice shout out. Yes, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, it's certainly a very different museum, I'd say, like from a classical museum. Like if you've been there, you've seen like there's like lots and lots of objects kind of piled into the museum. And because I had my classes there, I'd walk around and I'd see this collection of objects from India everywhere, and they had like this name W. Crook everywhere on the label, and I was like, who is this guy? So that's where my research began. I kind of like started looking into this object. I found like it was I think 1,100 objects in total, and out of them it was like I think 268 or 238. I'm forgetting the exact number, but about those were on display. So these were all collected from India in the late 19th century and put on display and then just never been worked on after that. So it was completely new. It was, yeah, very less known about, and like we didn't really have like any biography on these objects, so nobody really kind of had studied them properly as a museum objects. I think I just started kind of tracing where they had come from, why were they collected, in what context. And then I kind of went into what now, what are they doing in a museum, and should they
Okay.
be there and stuff like that. So yeah, it was very, very deep.
Okay, wait. Okay, let's take a step back. Let's talk about this
Mhm.
this Crook guy, W. Crook guy. So you
Yeah.
said you kind of traced it. So in what capacity was this guy in India? What was he? What was his job?
So he was a British civil officer.
All right.
So the word for that in India is the collector, which is very funny because he also collected objects. So yeah, so he was a collector, which means he was a district magistrate. So he collected revenue, but he also managed court matters and kind of solved civil matters and stuff. Like basically, he was like an overlord of the whole district. He had a lot of power,
Okay.
and he was, I
What
think it.
district is that?
So
So we
it
know more
was
people.
yeah, it was a couple of districts, so like Gorakhpur and stuff like that in like Uttar Pradesh, which is like northern India. And yeah, so he kind of moved around Uttar Pradesh in like he I think he stayed there for 25 years. So it was like a long career in India. And yeah, as he moved around, he kind of would write about the people, conduct surveys. He wrote extensively, so there's lots of books that this guy wrote. And
He wrote.
yeah, he was an avid folklorist. So yeah, that was the issue with this guy, that he wrote a lot about the people, but he never made a catalog of these objects that he collected. Uh,
All right.
Not that I've found them. Maybe they have it somewhere, and I just haven't gotten to it yet. But yeah, so he wrote a lot about the people and the tribes, quote unquote, of the area, and like their cultures and their communities and stuff like that. And he also like collected these objects while he was writing about them, kind of send them to the museum in like batches, and they've just been there on display.
Okay, so he collected objects and sent them to the museum. He didn't keep them for himself.
He kept them for a while.
Mm.
So like I said, it's like 1,100 objects. So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, he started in India in the 1870s. I think 1871 was when he started his career in India, and the first acquisition in the Pitt Rivers, I think, is 1890. So he definitely kept it for a while, and then started
Yeah.
sending it to the museum at the later half of this career. And actually, the last acquisition item in the Pitt Rivers, I think, was as late as 2022. Uh, so there's like lots of objects that were just sent to the museum and not entered in the record, and they were like
Mm.
found in like 2021, 2022, and people are kind of like, okay, so we need to like give this a registration number and kind of, put it on the database. So it was a lot of hodgepodge of like a bunch of objects, different batches coming in like at different times, and yeah, just like
Hmm.
keeping track
Very
of
interesting.
that.
So, what's the perception of this? What's his name? William?
William Crook, yeah.
William Crook, of this William Crook in the local population. Is he considered kind of like the father of folklore archaeology in India, or is he like considered like a thief?
I mean, he's an avid folklorist. A lot of people, yeah, there's Richard Dawson who wrote about him, called him an avid folklorist of India, sort of like he wrote extensively, but he wasn't the only one by far. There were many writing, and especially at his time, 1870s, 1880s is when you have like lots of like journals coming out in India, like the Indian Antiquity. There's lots of like surveys that are starting at this time as well. The first, like the big Tribes and Castes of Bengal survey, I think, happens in like 1890. So a lot is happening at the same time. He's just one of the many, many civil officers who kind of have a lot of power. And I think, yeah, it's a little bit of a complicated history, but like he has been like given the orders to kind of survey the land. So there's historical precedents where the government wants to know its people and wants to like know how to govern the people better, and sort of like uh,
Okay, interesting.
yeah. Yes, it's kind of like, okay, so we need to understand these people that we're trying to rule. So they kind of tell their civil officers that, can you please like go into the lands and survey it and kind of create basically a census, and tell us how many tribes there are and what area are these tribes living in and stuff like that. So he goes into that and he starts collecting, but he's not the only one. And there's many at this time that are kind of in this area writing about it, and there's like interest growing and stuff like that. So he's one of many, but he's also important.
Okay, very nice. So you, right, as an Indian,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that they shouldn't be in the Pitt Rivers Museum? Do you think they should be back in India, those objects? Or do you think it's part of their history, the part of their biography?
Oh, that was basically the crux of my uh, thesis, and I don't think I've still answered it because I don't think I have the right to decide. These are tribal objects, quote unquote. I'm putting it in quotes, because, yeah, and like a lot of these objects don't really have a proper biography or a provenance, so you don't really know what tribe they came from. A lot of them are like Kol/Kharwar, from North India, and like North India is huge, so you don't know where it came from. And yeah, so like I can't decide because I'm not from a tribal community or from that particular tribal community. So I can't decide if it can be given back or not. But the thing is, people would decide that if they knew it was there. Like I said, there hadn't been a lot of research done on this at all. And whatever I could find on these objects was based on what he had written in his time and his letters and his notes and stuff like that. So it was very much just based on whatever primary sources the museum had available. Which is why I think there's like lots of research that we need to do before we can decide anything about what to do with it.
All right, interesting. So what kinds of objects are there in the collection? What the biggest categories, if I can say it like that?
Yeah, I mean, Pitt Rivers is an ethnographic museum, right? I'm putting it in quotes again. So there's lots of these are objects that would be used on a day-to-day basis. So I think the largest collection is ornaments. So there's like lots and lots of
Ornaments.
jewelry. Yeah, there's like necklaces, there's rings, there's things like cosmetics, there's like coal, there's also surgical noodles, noodles, needles. Oh my God.
Okay.
Needles, yeah, there's needles, there's tattooing instruments, there's things like toys for kids, and there's lamps, there's religious objects, lots and lots of idols of gods and stuff like that. So basically everything from anybody's daily life.
Okay. So there's maybe a controversial kind of, I'm playing
Mhm.
devil's advocate here, but maybe
Yeah.
people of the local tribe would say, these are just everyday objects. We don't care about these. Let them have it. It's just toys and ornaments. Do you think that they would share this opinion? Or do you think if they knew they would want them back?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I don't think people would care about it that much. That was, yeah, but again, I can't decide. But yeah, I think it's objects of daily use. People are not going to bear something that was like brought in like 8 years ago or whatever. But but I also think that is what is it doing in the museum right now? Okay, we can't give it back, but the way it is presented in the museum right now is not great for the people
So,
anyway.
yeah, I mean, let's paint a picture for everyone who's listening or who's never been at the Pitt Rivers Museum. The Pitt Rivers Museum is a small museum that proportionally, the amount of items that are presented are it's not equal. It's not equal at all. You go into the Pitt Rivers Museum and you're overwhelmed by the amount of items that are around you. You can barely walk through it's basically a rectangular or square space, goes into 3 floors, and that's it. And there's items from all around the world about pretty much everything, from weapons to ornaments to musical instruments to boats to anything you can imagine that is ethnographic, right? So, and the Pitt Rivers, I think, was in the news a couple of years ago because of their display of human remains, right? So maybe we can talk a bit about that. Take a note, take a footnote of that. We can talk about it. And it's I think it's one of those museums that it's constantly under question, I would say. It's constantly discussion in the news because it deals with the items that are part of someone's culture, and not just of their past, but of their present as well. So it's a question of how these things are presented. And let's start with that. I believe, and I think most people believe, that the presentation in Pitt Rivers Museum is bad. Do you share that opinion, and why, as a specialist?
Oh, I wouldn't call myself a specialist, but yeah, it is bad, and I think the museum acknowledges that. The Pitt Rivers, I think, is one of the very few museums that I've actually seen very openly say that yes, we are problematic. We are a representation of colonial violence, and we very much have objects that are very, very problematic. They did a project recently. It's called Labeling Matters, I think, and it was just them going around the museum and kind of noting down all the problematic labels. Because if you like see, there's lots of like very problematic words in the labels in the museum. So like you said, you walk in and there's one section that's just fire materials, there's one section that's boards, pens, uh, and it's one of those museums that is very unique for that, because I don't think there's many museums that kind of display their objects like that, where every pen from every part of the world is in the same box, you know.
Yeah.
uh yeah, they do that, and then they have the old labels, so they haven't changed the labels. They're the labels that they came in like years ago, and a lot of them will have words like rhodesia, for example, or like I'm pretty sure there's like a couple n words in there. And
Oh my
yes,
God.
there's very problematic words in the labels, because it was fine at the time, right? And now we kind of know that of course it's
That's not
problematic.
okay.
Yeah, but the
Wow. So
museum says
before you continue, I may
mm,
add that I think you can visit the Pitt Rivers Museum virtually. I think the whole museum
yes.
can be visited virtually. So if people listening, maybe they can go to Pitt Rivers Museum, Oxford, and you could basically take a virtual tour of the museum, and you can understand, I think, even from the virtual tour, what we're talking about. You can literally walk in the museum, kind of a augmented reality kind of thing, and you can see what is going on. Sorry. Yes, continue.
Yeah, I mean, of course. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That was my fault. That was my fault. I'm so sorry.
No, no, you're all right. But yeah, what I was trying to say was, the museum very much acknowledges that yes, this is problematic. So they'll have that displays where they say, okay, find this label that says this problematic thing, and then they'll talk about the history of that and why that is problematic. So I think they're making good use of it. They're kind of
Mm.
directing people into like kind of seeing why this museum is problematic, and I think that's very good, because it kind of allows people to have a conversation about it rather than just like erasing it and never talking about it. So I think
Mm.
that's good. There's a long way to go, of course, but I think it's a good step.
Oh yeah, I see how this is important. Kind of like instead of like closing the doors and no one having access to anything because of bad labels, they're kind of like
Yeah.
dealing with it head on. But the question is how does this ever become not problematic? In which direction does that museum need to go? The museum that is named Pitt Rivers was General Pitt Rivers was somebody who basically did what everyone did in at that time, that they were colonials. They were in colonizing the world and then taking anything they wanted and basically putting them in a museum. So yeah, do you? Okay, we've talked a bit about the museum. So let's go back to the William Crook collection. Do you have any particular attachment to any item? Any
Ooh,
favorites
this
among
is like
collection?
this is like choosing between my kids. Oh my god. Uh,
1,100 kids? What? What?
no, I think I definitely got attached to a couple, and yeah, when I had to decide what pictures to put in my thesis, because I was very much like I can't put every picture I have, so it was very much like I had like a top choice. I was like, okay, this is going into my dissertation. There is a pot. It's called an earthen pot. Placed in devil shrines of Aboriginal people or something like that. I think the label says. So
What is that?
it is supposed to go. So I found it in the magic, witchcraft, and shamanism sorry, the magic,
Yep.
witchcraft, and shamanism section. That was a mouthful. But yeah, so I found it there, and I was like, okay, so just with the name of that, I know it has like a history, and I'll have to look up like what witchcraft and shamanism are they talking about. But yeah, the this one pot, I think when William Crook found it, he said in a letter that he found it um, in a grave. I think when he was walking around a district and he kind of like was doing his survey, he found this pot, didn't know what it was, collected it, sent it to the museum. And then a year after it was sent to the museum, he writes a letter to Balfour saying, okay, so the pot that I sent you last year, this pot is actually containing woman's I think remains. It was placed on a woman's grave, I
What?
think. So it had like some animistic value or something like that. He says in his letter, because the Archaeological Survey of India at that time had found similar pots in some other sites. So they were like, okay, so this is probably that. I didn't know what it was, but I've sent it to you, so you have it in your collection somewhere. You can like kind of okay, so this is what it is. It was something like that. So yeah, and then this pot is in the witchcraft and some shamanism section. So it was something that was probably taken from a woman's grave, probably had some sort of a religious value, and is now there. And I was just like, it just felt wrong. It just felt, horrible to see that something was basically robbed from a grave, and put in a section that is obviously has like racial connotations to it. There was another one. There was another one. There was a group of jewelry. So like, there's a glass box, and it has like bangles, and it has some threads and all of that, and the history of that was that it was taken from near a waterfall from a shrine at the Chandraprabha River in Uttar Pradesh again. And again, it was a shrine. It was something that women had offered to a god in the shrine. And he says something like, oh, yeah, so women offered this at the shrine, and I kind of collected it from that. So clearly, he saw women offering it there and picked it up and sent it to the museum. So there's lots of stuff like that where it kind of just
Uh,
hurts you to think about it, you know?
oh yeah, definitely, definitely. When you think about it with like, I don't know, proper heart, I would say, or like half a brain cell, you're like, oh, that was not the right thing to do. If you see someone offering something to their god, your immediate response is not to pick it up and take it with you.
Yeah.
Oh my god, do you intend on like doing more research on that stuff, like more extended research, maybe publishing a couple of these things? Because if I understood correctly, they're not being researched, right?
Yeah. I mean, with your dissertation, as you would know, you always have like a set of aims and objectives, and you can't really go beyond that. You have
Yeah.
like limited time and everything. But I have like a lot of things that I want to do with that collection. I was never able to contact experts from India for this. That was one of my goals going into the project, that I wanted to get an expert from India who would know what these are and kind of contextualize it for me. And the timing and all just didn't fit, and it didn't work out. But that is something I want to do in the future, where I actually get somebody, if not from the community, somebody who like has studied about their community all their lives and kind of can tell me what these objects mean and what do they think should be done, because I feel
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah. And then definitely there's like, I found out that William Crook had a huge collection of his own writings and papers sent to the Royal Anthropological Society. That is a collection of documents that I want to read, definitely, and I haven't gotten my hands on them. Maybe there's a catalog hidden there, who knows.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
that
that's,
sounds.
yeah.
I mean, I can see kind of like, you going on a field work for 3 months and just touring around every little village and every little tribe in India and like bringing them objects and be like, tell me what you know about this object.
Yeah.
And I can
Mhm.
see people being like, oh, my grandfather used it or something like that. They would use it for this. And I can see like, oh, the interesting kind of comparisons between the labels and what the people would say about them, which it doesn't mean that the labels will be wrong for that matter, but it may show kind of the historicity and the biography of an object, right? Which
Yeah.
I think will be super interesting. Also, archival research, very important. So, how long would you be working in the British Museum collections? How long is your contract?
I mean, I'm here till October, definitely. Yeah, but I'm also kind of hoping that after that I can start getting into a PhD, start getting,
All right,
applying to like,
that was my next kind of like that's where I was going to. So, what do you want to do? You want to do a PhD? That's what you're.
yeah, I really want to do a PhD in the future. There's this collection, but there's also like all over the UK. There's hundreds of collections like these, and I feel like it would be amazing if I could actually just work on them and kind of contextualize them in a way that's not something that was written like 500, like 50 years ago by somebody who didn't understand the culture at all. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
yeah, try to like contribute as much as I can in my own way, I
All
guess.
right. So, do you want to stay in the UK to do the PhD? Do you want to go somewhere else?
So for the PhD, I want to stay here definitely. Because I feel like I want to be closer to these collections. Uh, yeah, so this is where I want to be for now. But in the future, I think my long-term goal is definitely going back into India and Indian archaeology particularly. So it would be very much what I learn here. I kind of give back there, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Even though I mean, with the international fees, I don't know how much you. I think you're giving too much from what you're getting back.
Mhm.
Anyway, so that's a very interesting topic. So, do you think how's the archaeology in India? Are there places to work? What how's it like? Is there an antiquities department? How is it like? Because India is a big place.
Yeah, I mean that is such a loaded question. Uh, but I'll answer to the best of my ability. It's different from the UK, definitely. I think the big difference is that we don't have commercial archaeology as such. So
Mhm.
we don't have like commercial companies kind of doing digs and stuff. So it's definitely more government regulated and university based and stuff like that. So it is very hard to get into, I would say. And I definitely think there needs to be like a level of privilege for you to get into archaeology, at least in the level that I have tried to get into. I think it's hard. Uh, I also think that just archaeology in general is not very common in India. So
Hmm.
when I got into the field, I had to definitely explain to my parents what archaeology is and stuff like that. Uh,
Oh, interesting. We're going to talk about that later. Continue.
but also archaeology is also just everywhere. So it's a very funny dichotomy. We have a lot of archaeological sites and monuments, and of course, as you'd think, it's such a vast and varied country. There's so many monuments that you can research. There's so much potential in like every part of India for archaeological research. So I feel like if anybody is struggling to find an archaeological angle or like a site to work on, come to India. You'll find something. There's so much to work on. Yeah.
Oh my God. But yeah, of course, you need funding to do that, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're looking for something, so I want to know how that conversation went with your parents. You told them I want to study archaeology. So maybe let's not do that. Let me ask you first about how did you end up doing archaeology? What led you to archaeology?
Oh, anybody who's Indian knows about these books called the NCERT books. So you have like these state level books that every state student gets. Like if you study under the state board, basically, you get these state sanctioned books and they have their own history books and everything. I think sixth grade, I was like, uh, how old was I? I was like 11, 12, and I found this history book and it had like a little paragraph about these archaeologists who found the Indus Valley civilization accidentally. And I was amazed. I was like, you can just find something like that, you know? And I think it was after that I was kind of like, okay, so I just want to find things. That was
Okay.
like, yeah, yeah. I think that's how I started. So I want to go out. I want to like be near monuments. I just loved it. I just loved going to like old monuments and places like that. Just like museums were my favorite growing up. And yeah, I think after that, it was just like I knew I was like horrible at math and science was not my cup of tea. So I was like, okay, so I'm doing archaeology then.
So that's settled. Okay, so you decide where did you do your bachelor's then?
I did my bachelor's in Delhi in India. So I actually did my bachelor's in history. So like I said, so I wanted to go to Delhi University. They didn't have an archaeology degree. And yeah, so there's very specific universities in India that do archaeology. And I didn't really know about them because you don't really know about archaeology when you're in school, right? So I kind of like started with a history degree. While I was in my history degree, kind of realized, okay, no, I want to definitely do archaeology. And yeah, then I just came to Oxford.
Okay, so how did you choose Oxford? Why Oxford out of anywhere else?
Oh, I think it was mostly because Oxford offered a contemporary archaeology degree. And that was just like,
Right.
okay. So I was very much like, I want to do archaeology, but not, I knew I wouldn't be good at finding the history of one pot shirt, or like finding like, what this wear means, like stuff like, which is very, very important. I just don't think I'd be good at it. I really wanted to do the politics of archaeology, kind of seeing,
Yeah.
how people interact with archaeology, what they understand with archaeology, and how they shape archaeology in turn. So when I saw the contemporary archaeology degree, I like kind of looked up the streams and everything. I was like, okay, this is it for me. And it was also that I had read my supervisor's book very recently. So I was kind of like, okay, so I need to like study this, exactly this.
Exactly. Who was your supervisor?
Dan Hicks.
Oh, yeah. Right. Very, very brilliant archaeologist, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, let's. Yeah, we can't say anything bad. He was supervisor. Yeah.
He was great. Yeah, he was wonderful.
I don't remember you saying anything bad about him.
No, he was great. I
I
thought
think he was great, right? Yeah.
I think he really pushed me where I needed to go. I think I wouldn't have gotten where I did. So yeah, he was great.
Nice. So where's Dan Hicks from? Is he English?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So how did he react when you came up with like this topic? It was like, I want to study this thing.
Oh, I think he was kind of instrumental in me finding this. I was kind of like, so when I first talked to him, I was very much like, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that. I had like a million ideas, and he was kind of like, okay, so you need to streamline stuff. You can't do it like that. So I was like, okay, so there's this collection that I want to work on. And I talked to him about William Crook, and I said, yeah, so William Crook is this collector from India. And he was like, okay, so what do you mean by collector? And I said, a district officer. He's like, I thought you meant like a collector, as in a collector of objects. And that is why I was like, oh my God. So he was a collector and a collector. And that's why the topic of my dissertation, I called it the collector and the collected from that. So it's kind of like, okay. Yeah, so he was very much,
Poetry.
he was very good with like just me saying, okay, I want to do this, and then him kind of like just giving me very streamlined opinions on, okay, so this is important, this isn't important right now. He was very much what I needed, like just being like, okay, so you need to focus on this. This is great. Think more about this. Okay, read this, and this. So yeah, I think that was very helpful.
All right, very nice. So anyway, let's go back to you had to tell your parents what archaeology is, you said. Well, is it
Yeah.
because in India archaeology is like not a thing, or just because people don't care about it enough?
I mean, it's definitely a thing. It's just government regulated. And
Yeah.
especially in my family, we're like a family of accountants. So nobody had ever heard of archaeology before. And yeah, so it's definitely, when I was growing up, I had never heard about archaeology as a career option. Uh, Now I think it's, yeah, there's universities, and I think more because I've come to a university now, I can see that there's a whole world of archaeology. It's just that people don't see it a lot of times. Yeah, so there's universities, they offer great degrees. We have like 2-year masters that includes like field work, and it's very, very useful, very like well done. But yeah, when I told my parents, I was like, okay, so archaeologists kind of dig stuff up, and then you kind of tell history from that. It's very hard to talk about archaeology when there's like no background. And so my mom was like, okay, so you want to dig stuff? I was like, yeah. So it was like, okay, so like in a backyard. I was like, no, mom. So like there's like a trench and stuff like that. So we went to like a temple the next day, and there were some people digging a pond by the temple.
Ooh.
And my mom was like, okay, so that's what you want to do? And I was like, no. Yeah, so he was a journey.
It was a journey, but you convinced them, and they said yes.
Yeah, I was very lucky with them just being, okay, yeah, so if that's what you want to do, do it. We don't really get it fully, but if you think you can do well, just do it.
Oh, that's amazing. It's amazing to hear a story about, supportive parents saying do it. So what would you have done if they said no? Now that you know how archaeology is, would you say I would risk it all and go do archaeology despite people telling me not to?
Um, that's hard to do, to like say anything about, because I can't think of doing anything else. At this point, I feel like I've become so deeply entrenched in archaeology at this point that if you ask me to do anything else, I don't think I'd be good at it. Uh, yeah, they
No, but
definitely.
I get
Oh no.
it.
They definitely wanted me to do something like law. Be like, okay, so you need like a stable career. You need to be able to earn your own money and stuff like that. And archaeology is not famous for that. So it was very much that, okay, find something stable, maybe do archaeology on the side. And I was like, okay, no, I can't do that.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible to do archaeology on the side,
It doesn't
right?
happen. You have to give your life and soul into it.
It's either all in or nothing at all.
Or nothing at
Yeah,
all,
that's nice.
definitely.
Yeah. So anyway, you chose to do it, and it's a demanding career, right? It's a demanding by means that there's no certainty. I would say in archaeology, we work contract to contract, right, for 2 years, 3 years, and then some of us by the end will be lucky to have kind of a stable job, like a stable position where you're like, oh yeah, this is my work, and I will be doing that, and I will, until I retire. So that I think it's a point of contention between archaeologists where they say, I would ideally want to have a family by the time I'm 40,
Yeah.
so I will go out of archaeology. So how does that look like for you? Do you think you can because some people manage both of it, right? They're working contract to contract, but they have 3 kids, and but they're married and they're happy and they're doing all that. So how is it like for you? Do you see yourself like having a family and starting a household while being an archaeologist?
I think that was one of the reasons why I kind of early in my career didn't want to do museum studies specifically. I'll tell you why. When I started archaeology, a lot of people told me that, okay, so you're doing archaeology now. In a couple of years, just shift to museums. It's an indoor job. It's stable, and you'd be able to start a household. And I was kind of like, okay, so I'm not going to do that just because you've said it. I'm not going to get into museums, which annoys me now because I've naturally gotten into museums. Yeah, so I think, yeah, I was definitely it is a little a scary choice to make, I think, when you get into archaeology, because you know that you're not going to have friends around you are going to have like a established house and like a well settled life and everything, and you're just going to be like, okay, so I'm like for a month in a different country altogether, living in a campsite and stuff like that. But I think that's the fun of it, right? Like you can't I think archaeologists go into the field because there are people who can't be settled. And I think I'm definitely one of those where I can't just think of doing the same job for the rest of my life. So I like having a little bit of variety. And I am so scared even thinking of families and households. So let's not talk about that at all. I'm not
Wow.
going to get into that for the next 10 years. No, thank you.
Oh, that's I mean that's a stance on life, but I think you're very much right because it's a weird thing sometimes. You may talk to a friend or something like that who are having regular lives, and they will ask you, "So what are you up to today? What have you done?" I'm like, "I was in the library. What have you done?" They're like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
mowing the garden or something like that." We're like, "Oh great, that's good for you for mowing the garden." I was studying the thing I've been doing for the past how many years. Uh, so
Yeah, I mean, I
it's
just
yeah.
went to India. I'm sorry, I just went to
Oh
India
yeah,
like
go.
in the last month, and I met a few friends who've just like had like proper stable jobs now, and everybody's at that phase where they're like trying to like thinking of getting a house, maybe renting like a place with their friends and stuff. And she asked me, okay, yeah, so I was doing this, and what were you doing like yesterday and stuff like that. I was like, I was cleaning a cow skeleton yesterday. That was what I was doing.
That's what I will be telling everyone from now on, even
Yeah.
though I've never done it. What are you doing? I'm cleaning a cow's skeleton. How about you? Oh my god, that's so good. Anyway, so would you now that you know all this and we've talked about all this, would you advise people to go into archaeology?
If they're ready for this life, 100% yes, go for it. But go with some, um, I guess, some safety net options. I think if you just think about it practically, that's what I've been thinking about. That's why I got this job in the first place. You need to pay the rent. And if you're,
Yeah.
if you're doing archaeology, you have to think about where you're going to get your money. If you're just doing projects and contracts, because you don't know when you're getting the job. And archaeology is competitive as a word I can't say here, but
Yeah.
it is. It is so competitive. Jobs are so hard to find, definitely. So it's very much a thing of luck. You just get it or you don't get it, and then you have to spend years and years to kind of get be good at it, and then be at a stage where you can like afford a stable job. And I think if you can do that, and if you're ready for that, to be like in your late 20s and still not have a stable job, go for it.
cries in silence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah, like if you're ready for that life, do it. Because there's nothing as thrilling as archaeology. I don't think
Mhm.
there's any job where you can say that you've just been camping as part of your job and you've found this, you're not dug for hours and hours and then you find something and then, it's just like the wonder of that, you would know it's so
Oh
amazing.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if it is like 2% of what we do as archaeologists,
Yeah,
when people ask me, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm excavating shipwrecks. How about you?" Like, I'm being told about
exactly.
it. So anyway, we've spoken a lot about museums in this episode. Since you are an expert on music, can I say that? You're an expert on music. I'll say
I'm
that.
not going to
Okay.
go.
You're an expert on museums. I will call you an expert on museums. So I want you to tell me, what is your favorite museum
Oh my God. What is my favorite museum?
and why?
Okay, I think it's because we've talked about it for so long, but the Pitt Rivers, I don't know if
What?
it's a very contentious answer, but I'm rating museums in terms of what emotion they're getting, like how much emotion they're inciting in you. And I think I've never felt as emotional as I have when I first entered the Pitt Rivers. It's You get into the museum and you're either just like, oh my God, this is amazing, or you're like, what did I walk into? What is
I
this?
know, I know. I almost had a panic attack first time that I walked into it. I was like, "What is all this? Jesus!" So yeah,
Exactly.
that's a surprising answer.
Yeah, it was like
So wait, so if the Pitt Rivers is your favorite museum, what's your least favorite museum? I'm expecting you to say something like the British Museum now, and I'm gonna lose my shit.
I can't say that because I work there.
Is that an answer?
No, that's not an answer. No,
No, no, no. Well, I said something
no.
good
There's
about the
like,
British Museum, so it's covered.
yeah. We never said that, but yeah, museums like that where there's lots and lots of objects and no conversation. I feel like classical, like just the idea of a museum. So like the Ashmolean as well. I didn't like the Ashmolean at all, which I feel like is a contentious thing to say, but
Ooh, you didn't like the Ashmolean.
no,
Why?
it's so white and bland. There's nothing happening there's such amazing stuff in that museum. And I
Yeah.
didn't really think that as an environment in itself, I'm not judging by the collection, I'm judging by the environment and the museum.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's okay.
And
That's an interesting conversation to have. So why didn't you like it?
yeah, and what that is making you think of. And I think Ashmolean didn't really make me think of anything. You walk in and there's like a huge wall of just like heads of these people. Have you seen the wall? And it was kind of like,
Yes.
yeah, it was
The Roman emperors.
the Roman emperors. Yes,
Yeah.
that's what it is. Yeah, and it just felt very domineering, and I didn't really feel like I was in a museum as such. It just felt
Mm.
like like a display of like, oh look this, oh look that, and there's this gallery and that gallery. I'm sure people love the Ashmolean, and a lot of them are probably cursing me out right now, but I think it's a good museum. I just don't like it. I don't like spending time there.
Okay, how would you make the Ashmolean better then? If you could, like, redesign it or make some changes.
But the first thing I would
Ah.
do is color the walls. It's so bland. just just it's such a huge museum. I'd just like to have more conversation. I think that's what the Pitt Rivers, that's why I like it, is even when, so you mentioned the human remains, like the human remains
Oh
that
yeah,
were
and the Pitt
removed
Rivers. Yeah, yeah.
from the Pitt Rivers. So from the shelf that they were removed, they put like a whole poster saying, yeah, so these were removed, do you want to know why they were removed? This is why they were removed. And so there's conversation, you're thinking about something. And I felt like I don't do that when I'm in the Ashmolean. Maybe it's just because I'm more into contemporary archaeology, and the Ashmolean, kind of caters to a different kind of archaeologist background, or like, um,
Yeah, I mean, most of the Ashmoleans, like, classical Roman stuff.
yeah,
Interesting.
which is great. Don't get me wrong, which is
Yeah, yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Yeah, I just like it doesn't inspire me, so to speak.
Even though, yeah, I see it, and so devil's advocate again. I know that in the Ashmolean they put all those interactive games that you can play throughout the museum.
Yeah,
So, for example, how does it feel like to ride on clay, or how does it feel like to lift a stone, or how does it feel like to, I don't know, touch something? There was this thing about touching an artifact.
yeah, it
Anyway,
was. Yeah,
so do you think that this is part of the museum's, like, I don't know, a plan to make it more conversation focused and they're failing? Or is it like this is something for kids and you should not be talking about it?
No, we should definitely be talking about it.
Uh,
Yeah, no, I think that's important and that's a good step because museums are not just for sight, it should incite all your senses, I think. So you should be able to touch things. You should be able to kind of, smell things. A lot of museum. I found another answer for my favorite museum. It's called the museum. It's called the Museum of Conflict, and it's in Raipur, India. It was definitely, yeah, because it was that museum that kind of incited all your senses. You'd walk into a room, and yeah, it was a like the name suggests, it was a museum that just talks about conflict in the area and like how the history of conflict has developed and what people have lost in that and kind of things like that. So you walk in, there's a room that just has uh, it just incites your smell. So there's like bowls and bowls of spices and local products and stuff like that, drinks. So you could just like pick it up and smell it and stuff like that. So it's very interactive and
so
then kind of
how does that work in a conflict museum? Like the spices and the smell is to get a sense of the area.
yeah, it just like talks about, okay, so this is what the local people eat. This is what, you drink in this festival and stuff like that. This is what people use for, healing coughs, for example. And yeah, so you just like, you can pick it up, you smell it, and it's very much an open space for conversation. So they like a write on boards there. It says that please talk, please be as loud as you want. Please run around, don't break anything, please, but also like around, you can run around, you can talk to other people, touch things as long as it says don't touch and stuff like that. um and there was another room that had like headphones hanging from the wall, from the ceiling. So there were like headphones hanging from the on strings. You could put
Yeah.
those on and it was just like a person talking about their life history, and you could just like stand there and listen to it. And I just thought that it was a beautiful way of kind of immersing a person into a person's life, which I feel like that's what the Ashmolean lacks a little bit, where I don't feel
I
like I'm
see it.
talking and looking into like people's histories.
Yeah, because I mean, you cannot like hang a string of headphones upon
Of course, yeah, yeah,
a
yeah,
mummy, an Egyptian mummy, let the mummy just tell the
yeah, yeah,
story.
yeah,
Even though someone could do it, like you can have a recording of someone being like, "I am Step" or something like that, whatever the name is.
yeah,
And I was a priest of Isis, and I did this and this and this, and because Egyptians like to write things a lot,
yeah,
so you could actually write the story of a person and kind of record it. So I think what you're saying is very valid, and you never know. Maybe someone from the Ashmoleans listening to this right now.
If somebody
If
from the
if
Ashmolean is listening, I don't hate you. I'm so sorry. But yeah,
maybe
but
someone is not.
that's actually, I'm sorry, that's raising like a very interesting thing that I've been reading about. It's called critical fabulation, and it's basically this idea of how much story can you put into archaeology, Because
Okay, talk to me about it. I was
yeah,
not aware
it's
of that.
yeah, we did a paper during my master's on this, and I just got so obsessed with this idea of, archaeology is very scientific, and you focus a lot on the facts, and this is what was recovered, and this is what the story of this is. But then there's archaeologists that talk about, can you make a story out of this? Can you talk about the silences? So, for example, one that I can think of right now is Sadia Hartman. She was she's amazing as a writer, I think, and she wrote this thing called Venus in Two Acts that I read for the paper, and I got obsessed with her. She basically talks about logs from slave ships, and on the slave ships there's like diary entries basically, and these entries mention two women. So it says, okay, so the captain of the ship was punished or was taken into a trial for killing this woman by like hitting her too hard and stuff like that, and that is all the mention of the woman is. So there's no other mention of that woman. So what we have recovered from the archive or from history or archaeological record is just that. And she kind of says, okay, so can we think more about this woman? Where did she come from? What was she doing in the ship? How did she pass time when the ship was sailing and stuff like that? So that's necessarily not fact, or it's not something that has been archaeologically recovered, but that's a silence in archaeological record. And can we fill these silences with our imagination, and how much can we do that? I think that's the idea, and I
Wow.
absolutely
Yeah.
love it. Yeah.
So what's the book called again?
I think it's a paper. It's called Venus in Two Acts, but I think she's written much more stuff.
Okay,
Yeah.
Venus into Act. And what's the name for the author? To say it again.
Sadia Hartman.
Sadia Hartman. Okay.
Yeah.
That's superbly, because, archaeology is very scientific, but because people worked towards making it very scientific, right? Because when the archaeology started in the 1800s or something like that, the end of the 19th century, it was more of what you're saying, was people writing stories and trying to find the artifacts of the stories, right?
Yeah.
Schliemann went to Troy holding Homer in one hand and he said,
Yeah.
let's go find Troy. It was about the story. It wasn't about the archaeology. And then people work hard to make it a science and not just people telling stories. But it's very interesting to see what you're saying right now, that we should not forget how kind of archaeology started, and we should be able to offer those stories. Because I imagine if someone writes an academic article about the whole story of a person based on one line,
Yeah.
I think like quote unquote serious archaeologists would be like,
Mhm.
what,
Yeah.
what are you doing? What, you have no evidence to support that. But imagine, as you said, someone reads this paper or reads a book that's in a similar vibe, even though it might not be completely true, but then they get into the actual story and the actual archaeology of how did that happen, or how did that came about. They may, in the long run, turn into actual quote unquote actual serious
Yeah.
archaeologists. Well, they work with the artifacts and the everything. But I think you're right. So, do you plan on writing a book?
Oh my God. I don't know, maybe if I find something that's worth writing, yes, I'd love to write a book. My
Okay.
dad would be very happy. Like I talk to him every day and he's like, okay,
Really?
so are you writing something? Is it enough that we can publish it? I'm like, okay, come on.
Wow, nice. So,
Yeah.
okay. I'm pitching out something here. So, what if you had to pick an item from the William Crew collection and write a book about it? Would it be the same one, the same pot you said before, and write the story of the woman who was buried with the pot? I mean, think about it.
Oh, oh my God. Yes, definitely. I'd love to write about her. I mean, if I get more information out of it, if I can find more about it, yes. I feel like objects like these that have been so horribly misrepresented for so many years deserve, proper understanding of them. Um, Especially when they're kind of considered to be, shamanistic or like witchcraft
Yeah, yeah.
related and stuff like
Witchcraft.
that. Yeah, you
Wow.
want to properly represent them. And I think, yeah, so with what you were talking about before, the story thing, I was just like thinking of 500 different things at the time. But yeah, definitely, I think we have to consider that the archaeological record that we recover now was also created by humans. So they had their own biases when they were writing them, which is why these women were just mentioned in a single line and just never written
Yeah.
about again. So you have to also think about the biases that were when it was written down. And if you think about fabulation, if you think about writing stories, I think we can tackle that bias, which is why I think
Mm.
this whole idea is very interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's those kind of this makes me think of something similar but different. Those meta researches in archaeology where you research, the past of the past, or kind of the
Right.
future of the past, and you see the past of a past population, and you can kind of you mess up your brain because you're seeing how past people viewed their own past. So I think it's super interesting to see how it's kind of you see how a person in the past saw a person in the past,
Yeah.
right? This is
Mhm.
what you're doing, and you have to work with their biases, but you have to understand and accept your own biases and how they contrast or are aligned with the previous person's biases. But at the same time, you have to be like, this object, this pot can say so much. It can say everything, right? So, so many interesting things to talk about. I don't know. I'm thinking about so many things right now. It's crazy. Uh, but yeah, I would be lovely. I would definitely read the book. you write about the pot and the woman who was buried with it, and its story.
Yeah.
So when's that out?
Oh my God, you're going to hear me moan about it if I ever think about writing it. You're going to listen to me
I,
just rant
yeah,
about it for years
it
and
w-
years before I.
I'll be the problem. But
Yeah.
it's how your parents, get kind of like turn around and were like, so what are you writing? Can we
Yeah,
publish it?
they're
And
they're
like,
always very excited. Whenever they like hear anything that's like archaeology related, they send me pictures of it. They're like, "Oh, do you know what this is?
nice.
This is so cute." Yeah, it's very nice.
Yeah. Also, another comment I loved. So I need to to like come forward here and be like,
Hmm.
this has not been kind of a maritime focused talk, right?
Yes.
But I wanted you to be here because I think you have so many interesting things to say. So I appreciate the fact that you threw in the book about the slave trade and the woman
Yes.
on board and the captain. I appreciate that. That
Yeah, when I was saying it, I was like, okay, finally something that is relevant in this podcast.
the people who listen to this podcast and are like maritime archaeology, they'll be like, "Oh, yeah, mention, yeah,
Yeah,
great,
ship.
great. Ships, captains, archives, great." Oh no, I think anyone who not even an archaeologist, but like has interest in their past or their antiquities would find this talk very, very interesting because in reality, museums are like our first contact with archaeology. Everyone's first contact with archaeology. Like no one started archaeology. Be like, yes, the first thing I did was I went and digged something up. No,
Yeah,
everyone's like, oh yeah, I went to a museum once and I saw it and it was super interesting. And I was like, hey, what can I do with it? Right.
yeah.
So I want to say thank you very much. I'm going to start wrapping up here because we're, reaching the time limit and I don't want to overdo it. So it was lovely to have you. We have talked about so many things. We've talked about museums, colonization, PhD, life in archaeology, having to convince your parents to like do archaeology, which is
Mhm.
something that I was a first on this podcast, and I think you handled it really well. And so okay, now that I've said this, kind of a final question: do you feel like it's kind of a selfish question, but do you feel like you have made an impact in your environment, in your local environment, like your immediate family or extended family or friends, because you study archaeology?
Oh, ask me again in like 5 years, and maybe I'd have like a positive answer to that. Right now, I think I've just started. I don't know if I can. I think I've definitely impacted my immediate family. I've turned my brother into a pseudo archaeologist, which is I feel like that is an achievement because when I started doing it, I would like just take my because it was like right after COVID, so we were all at home.
Yeah, yeah.
Restrictions, the C word, the huge, the pandemic that we don't talk about. Uh,
Mhm.
we were at home and I would just like take my brother sometimes that'd be like there was a temple very close to my house, like a 15-minute drive, and I took my brother and I held gave him like an inch tape, like a measuring tape.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, okay, so let's make a floor plan for this. Let's hold the tape from there. I want to do something, and I would just do that. So I think now he's become more archaeological when he
Oh
like looks at
my
stuff.
god.
Yeah, I've taught him
Co-
how to make a floor plan and stuff like that.
COVID was a weird time, man. I went to the local temple and did floor plans. Oh my god.
Yeah,
Were they
good
accurate though?
things.
Were they good?
Ah, I mean, yeah, it was a very simple temple, so it was very like a simple
That
four by
doesn't
four
matter. I
floor
mean, if
plan.
you
Yeah,
if you get the measurements right and the scale right, I mean, it's an accomplishment in itself. So yeah, no, it's like because I see, like you said, people, my parents didn't know what archaeology was, and I had to convince them. But now you're like, oh yeah, and now my parents, whenever they see something archaeology related, meaning they understand what archaeology is, they will
yeah,
send it to me. Or they will take active interest in like what is archaeology. So, for example, the way I ask this question is because for me, from when I started being an archaeologist, in family gatherings, there will be this one uncle, this one aunt, this one cousin, this one somebody who will come up to me and be like, so, and they ask me an archaeology question.
yeah.
Usually it has to do with Atlantis or Alexander the
Atlantis.
Great or something like that. But I will be the point of conversation for archaeological matters. And it's, of course, that goes into a much deeper conversation of how important it is to have a conversation about our antiquities, about our identity, where we come from, and these things that interest people, you know? So I believe you've had a positive impact in your environment. I think you. You said it yourself through the various examples, but now you know that meaning to it. But I'm sure you'll have an even greater impact in the future, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had a little bit of a negative impact recently when I was flying back home. The guy next to me was like starting up a conversation about like, what do you do and all of that. And
Mm.
I was like, yeah, so I study archaeology. And he was like, oh, so, okay, so I have to give you context. There was a horrible Bollywood movie that came out in recent years.
Mm.
And the lead character was an archaeologist. The movie is called Ram Setu. And I will say the name because it was horrible. And everybody
I
listening
will.
should know that it was a horrible movie. Yeah, so he's an archaeologist and he does things that will like really boil your blood. I would cry when I was watching that movie. And yeah, so the guy next to me was like, "Oh my god, so you're an archaeologist like Ram Setu? Oh my god, that movie was amazing. Is that how you do archaeology?" For context, the first 15 minutes of the film, this archaeologist goes into an excavation site, like starts excavating and immediately finds like a whole chest of gold coins. So that was what the movie was. And I kind of went on a whole rant, like a good 15-minute rant on this guy, this poor guy who was just trying to make conversation. I was like, no, archaeology is not that. That is a horrible representation. Don't think about it like that. So I've had that impact as well.
Look,
But
you're
yeah.
actively impacting your community positively. You're making a
Mm.
change. Good job. Good for you. Wow, that was amazing. Anyway, I said I will wrap up about 10 minutes ago.
Oh, shit, yeah.
Do you have any closing remarks for us? Anything you'd like to say?
Um, I think I just anybody who's listening, if I could say that next time you go into a museum, think about this podcast maybe. When you go into a museum, look at the labels. I always tell people that the labels are very, very important and they tell you a lot about what the museum was thinking when they put this object on display. So don't think about it as, oh my God, this object is there, but think about it as, why is this here and what is it telling? If that helps, if I can say that.
Oh, yeah, that was great. Thank you very much, Vanshika, for being with us here. Thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of the MARE Podcast. I will see you all very, very soon. And have a nice rest of your summers, right? Because it's summer now. Bye.